our Stone-Aged ancestors walked this very land, they would have looked upon these northern light shows just like I'm doing now with my camera.
Rob, come and see this, man. I can't freaking believe what's going on, man.
It's super bright. I can see it on the video, Jonas.
The trees they walked through would have been important to them. Tools and medicine were made from them. Food was picked from them, and their houses were built from them. These trees were integral to the life of our ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years, and the value and everyday use of these trees is embedded into our current legends and stories.
I am now in Scandinavia, and I want to share with you 5 legendary trees. But first, I ask you this. Do you think you could identify 5 of the most common trees near you and share them with your neighbors? Many of the trees that I'm going to share with you today are found all across the northern latitudes, and many of the societies across the world have their roots in these northern latitudes. So maybe you can already identify these 5 trees, and if you can't, they're probably trees you should know about. So to help us out, we have Jonas, who is a Swedish biologist, and he's going to introduce us to all of these very popular and famous trees here in Sweden.
If you know what's around you, 1, you feel safer, and 2, things become a lot more interesting.
Being in Sweden is an important part of this story, and that's because Sweden is where taxonomy started. In fact, right here in this very city, Uppsala.
The botanical garden in Uppsala, got the castle.
And all of it started with this man, Carl Linnaeus.
Right here.
Top 5 probably most famous Swedes of all time, Carl Linnaeus.
All right, let's get to the first tree. The birch.
Well, the group of trees here in Sweden that is, I would say, most easily recognizable are the birches. We have 2 main large birch species. This is the mountain birch that you find up here in the north. As you can see, this is kind of an interesting landscape. It's like right at the base of the mountains. And then down south and throughout most of the country, I would say, you will find the silver birch. That's the one that grows tallest and widest. The way to recognize these birch trees are this distinct white silvery looking bark with, you see the dark spots. The bark of the birch is really useful. You can make a lot of things with it. Another thing is birch trees are very popular as firewood. It's a soft wood and it dries quick and it burns really well. I feel that they're a very distinctive feature in our forest here. Just look behind us up here in the mountains. My goodness, this time of the year it's just gorgeous.
And then you have the pine tree.
This is a pine tree, or the way we call it in Sweden, a tall, or in Latin it's called Pinus sylvestris. I know that sounds kind of funny to someone in the US, but that's what we call it. The funny thing is that, you know, Rob was coming here a lot.
Forestry that's here in Sweden.
And he was asking me, how many pine trees do you have? And I'm like, what do you mean? We have pine trees. Like this is the pine tree. And I know in the US there are several different ones, but it is actually only 1 native species that we have here in Sweden. We have an imported one as well, but this is the only native pine tree that we have.
This particular pine is what now in English I call the Scots Pine, and it does have a large distribution throughout Europe and Asia. And a lesser known but very fun fact about pine trees is that you can make a tea out of their needles. It's high in vitamin A and C and was thus a traditional remedy for scurvy. Just grab a handful of needles and steep for 15 to 20 minutes. One warning, make sure you can identify the pine near you and you've double checked on this fact for your tree.
And in Sweden, it's hugely important for wood production. A lot of our economy comes from wood. Pine is definitely one of the most important species that we have.
It turns out 39% of the trees harvested in Sweden are pines. The second most common tree that makes up this pie piece is
The Norway spruce.
Just like the pine, this is a coniferous tree. It has these needles. The spruce has the shorter kind of spiky needles like this, and the branches tend to kind of fall down a little bit as opposed to the pine where they grow a little bit more up. Also, the pine tree has longer pine needles than these ones, so they're quite easy to recognize. In Sweden, they grow naturally, but they're also a substantially important part of our wood export for wood products. And if you were to go into this forest, especially the planted ones, they'll grow dark and dense. Let's go inside, take a look.
This is not exactly how it would look in the wild. There'd be a lot more diversity. This is a planted forest. It is a monoculture. The trees are all Norway spruce. They're very important in the forestry industry. And this is how they were planted in the past. There are new practices that allow more diversity now. These are relics. These are about 25 years old here. Down on the forest floor, it's dark. and there's almost nothing that grows except for mosses and lichens, and you'll also find a lot of fungi that grow on the forest floor. So if you're reading old stories about the deep, dark woods that the wolves live, or the toadstools in the troll forests, many of those are gonna come from forests just like this, full of Norway spruce, because it was so important here in Europe. Fun fact, this is traditionally also the Christmas tree of Europe. And next, you have the oak tree.
The oak tree here in Sweden is really easily recognized. There's only one species and the leaves are very distinct. You can see it like here. And they also produce these acorns in the fall that you can find.
As an ecologist, I need to point out acorns like this are really important for the animals that live in the forest. They provide a lot of energy because these things, if you eat them, are really nutritious. They're a nut. A side note about these acorns, a lot of people just have this idea that acorns are not edible, which is not true. Acorns have sustained human populations for a lot of human history. You'll take an acorn like this, it's a whole process, you'll grind it up, you make acorn flour out of it, and then at that stage it's still not quite edible because of the tannins inside, so you'll wash it, let those tannins leach out, and then you can eat it. And we tried that. Haley did this whole process. It was amazing, and in the end, we had bread.
So down in Europe, this is called an English oak or Pedunculate oak. And another fun fact is Linnaeus, this is the first oak that he identified. So it became the type species of all the oak trees in the genus.
And then this one, which is full of myths and legends, that is the Rowan tree. I want to show you the Rowan tree in the town of Kiruna. We're at the top of Sweden. If you look over behind me, that's not just a mountain, that's a mountain mine. It is the largest mine in Sweden. In fact, the largest mine in all of Europe. It brings in over 80% of the iron to Europe.
This mine is so valuable, in fact, that they're moving the entire town, including this massive church in the middle.
The casualty, couple buildings down.
And around the church and the parks are tons of rowan trees.
Back in the day when people believed in black magic and witchcraft, rowan trees were protector trees. So they actually protected the entrances to people's homes, and this area has a ton of them in the parks. And we've forgotten about these old legends, but it's kind of important. Let me show you some with berries though. Great example of a rowan tree right here. They have these red berries. These red berries, if you were to taste them, are very bitter, very acidic, and that's because they have two chemicals in them, sorbic acid and parasorbic acid. Now, sorbic acid is not harmful to you. In fact, they spray that on ham to help keep mold from growing on it. Parasorbic acid is bad for you. It's bad for your liver. But what happens is that you can actually let the first frost come through here, and that cold temperature converts parasorbic acid into sorbic acid. Or you can actually heat them up on the stove, and that helps convert it as well. So just a fun little fact. This might not make the top 5 most common trees in Sweden, but they are all over the parks, and it's just a fun tree to know about. So I thought we'd show you this tree here in Kiruna. Why is knowing trees important? Well, I think it's really important because when you look out across the landscape, are you just seeing green? Or do you have a connection to the area? Can you start to identify the different plants and animals where you live? It's really important. So occasionally we'll go around to different countries and we'll look at the trees in your area. Let me know in the comments below if you got all 5, if you could identify them and you knew exactly what they were, or which ones did you not know. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.